I did want to just start off with 3 things that I think have helped me and might help you guys better understand, how I've gotten to this point. And maybe from there, then I can just walk you through my journey a little bit if that's helpful. So maybe I should just start off and say that there's not, everybody tells you this, but there's not one kind of right formula that you take to get to where I am. I think everybody I meet has kind of tried to find their way for a little bit and then, made it to where they are. So I start with that. But then 2 of the biggest lessons that I've carried with me are kind of, we're all young and we're all starting off our careers now, but we all bring a unique value to the table. And so that's been really important to carry with me. It's taken me a long time to get to this point, but I just really hope that you can take away from this conversation that you shouldn't be afraid to assert your value in any position that you find yourself in. And then 3, we'll all find challenges, especially when we're looking for jobs, when we're trying to figure out what we want to do, and then in our jobs and in our professional lives. But the most important thing that has kind of kept me on a more focused path is that I always try to maintain perspective and try to understand, where whoever you're working with is coming from, and kind of step back and look to the whole picture. So I just offer that, but now I can give a little bit more detail on kind of how I got here. So I see in the chat we have a STEA major and then some global health majors. So I was a STEA major at Georgetown, and I graduated in 2018 with a global health concentration and then a French minor. And when I was a senior in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had done an internship at a financial services company during my junior summer, and I decided finance was definitely not for me. And so then I started applying to jobs in project and management consulting, and nothing landed. But what I realized throughout that process was I had my communications and my writing skills were pretty strong. But some of the skills that many of these companies were looking for were my analytical and economic and policy analysis skills. So I began looking for different opportunities, which ranged more from positions at the UN to, smaller nonprofit jobs. And I ended up interning for a philanthropist, and he also happens to be the ambassador to the World Health Organization that summer that I graduated, before I went to grad school at the London School of Economics, where I did my master's in international health policy and economics. And that experience, I know it's not traditional. People don't typically do their master's straight out of school. But for me, at least, it was really helpful to kind of get those additional skills and build my network there. I did ultimately, though, end up going back to work for the same ambassador, first as a project manager and then as his chief of staff. And our office was kind of in a unique position. We served as the bridge between the US government and the World Health Organization. So it was very high level, I should say. We dealt with, very top individuals, and we worked on things that range from malaria eradication campaigns to private health financing for health clinics across Rwanda and Kenya. But then in about October, November of 2019, we started getting reports of COVID. So a lot of our work then shifted to COVID management and managing both domestic policies on COVID and domestic testing and contact tracing protocols to more things like the international or global inequity and vaccine access and other things more so related to that. But then in that role, so that was really interesting, and just kind of getting exposure to all of these different things really helped me build both my communications and presentation skills, but then also kind of understand, how people operate, how to manage people, how to understand kind of like where they're motivated in order to get things done. And so I started applying to law school because I realized that I wanted to build my problem solving skills. But at the same time, we got this project from the Biden transition team where they were seeking our help to solve for the influx of migration at the southern border. And my mom is a Iranian refugee, so these kinds of things have always interested me. But I never really had the chance. There's not, I would say, not a lot of opportunities when you're young to work in that space. So I got lucky. And we ultimately ended up starting this thing called the Partnership for Central America, which is a public-private partnership with the Office of Vice President Harris and the U.S. State Department. And it's focused on driving private investment to Central America to solve for the root causes of migration. But I should say that really helped me find my passion, but I realize it's kind of a unique opportunity. But the one lesson I learned from that is that I really advocated for myself and I asserted myself to take on this project. And now I work there part-time while I'm also in law school. So I'll end there because I want to leave time for your questions, but I hope that's helpful.
That's great. And I think it's an important message that you just never know where you're going to land sometimes. So let's go back to your role at the WHO. If you could, as a program manager and then chief of staff, you mentioned a few projects that you worked on with malaria and COVID. Would you mind sharing a little bit more? Maybe you pick one or two of those to actually share, what did the work involve? What were some skills that you used? What were you doing so that students can get an understanding of what this role entails?
Yeah, of course. So I'll start first. Maybe I'll do one example on malaria and then I'll do another one on COVID. So when I first started, we were deeply involved in the management of malaria eradication campaigns. And Rwanda, I'm sure some of the global health majors have studied this. They're in a unique transition in their healthcare system, in that they have one of the most one of the best managed healthcare systems across Africa. And so one of their highlights is their malaria eradication programs. And so we were involved mainly in the negotiation process for funding. And so we would work really closely with NGOs like Malaria No More and the Gates Foundation. And then my role was kind of to perform the economic analyses, so figuring out where funding was being used effectively, where we could kind of reduce our margins. But then I also was involved in the research side. So we were looking into some of the research trials into the recently announced malaria vaccine. We managed a lot of those kind of pre-trials across Rwanda and across Kenya. And so we were looking at, the mechanisms for distribution of the vaccine. So what was working, what was not working. But also because we were at such a high level, we dealt a lot with convincing government leaders why vaccines work and, why they're effective and why they needed or why they should be more inclined to advocate that their citizens take the vaccine. And so I got a mix of very intense economic analysis skills, as well as really good exposure to policy management and policy negotiation. And then, so that's one example. And I think maybe one thing I should add too is that in the global health field, you'll have these opportunities to travel. So I got to go to Rwanda, I got to go to Brussels, which is where a lot of the policy negotiations were happening. And even though I was young, it didn't really make a difference because you're working with people across the board. There were some of the analysts in Europe were 19, and then my bosses were 75. So I got it. It's a really good exposure to just different ways of thinking. But then moving on, so then COVID happened, and my boss happens to be a philanthropist in Newark, New Jersey. And so we worked really closely with Partners in Health, which is Paul Farmer's NGO. And we set up the management and coordination of testing protocol across the city and contact tracing protocol, which involved coordination of a lot of different players. So like we had Partners in Health, we had the Newark local government, we had the New Jersey governor involved. And it was really trying to set up a system where we could track and trace not only everybody who was getting COVID, but kind of like how, I'm not sure how to articulate this, but kind of how the system was functioning overall. And so that involved a lot of metrics analysis. And to be honest with you, just like a lot of very intense conversations, because at the time, nobody knew what was happening. But I really enjoyed that experience because everybody was in such a new place. Like nobody had any idea what this virus was, how it was going to impact us long term. And so it was really just a lot of conversations around ideas, and how to make those ideas come to fruition was the most challenging part, especially when we didn't have funding. And I would say the morale of the teams that I was working with at the time was pretty low because everybody was really scared. So we had to figure out different ways to motivate people, to get them on board, and to kind of, convince them that their work was really going to mean something. If they couldn't see the immediate impact, they could be sure that there was some type of change in the long term. And even to this day, I still get notes from people being like, thank you so much. Like my aunt had COVID and she wouldn't have survived had we not set up like a home delivery testing protocol, had she not gotten tested and gone to the hospital then. So even if you don't get I guess the moral of the story is, even if you don't get immediate gratification from your work, it will always come back in some way or another. That I think for me at least is really motivating.
Gosh, it's really important work that you've been doing, really interesting projects. I'm sure we could dive deeper on that. And if anybody does want to, feel free to put a question in the chat. I do want to ask you about your current work, which also is really meaningful and exciting to work with Kamala Harris and on migration issues. So can you tell us more about what your work entails right now, your part-time work? Yeah, of course. So maybe a brief backstory. So I took on the role while I was chief of staff for the philanthropist that I have been speaking about. And he basically tasked me with he basically said to me, I don't know a lot about migration. I don't really know a lot about Central America. This seems to be a huge problem and we need to get this done. Can you do it? And so at the time I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. It was me and one other person who served on the Biden transition team. And both of us were trying to figure out kind of where's the entry point. So there were a lot of conversations around like, should we start at the border, and should we, set up, should we work with civil society organizations who are helping to manage children and women arriving at the border. But ultimately, when Vice President Harris took on the role of solving for the root causes of migration, just given the network of my boss at the time, and then the advisors that we had brought on board, we identified that perhaps the most long-term impact we could have would be for creating opportunity and hope within the region. So stemming migration at the source rather than solving for it when it's become a huge issue for our country.
So I've been in it from the very beginning, and I've basically done everything from creating our first strategy and managing our budget and our lawyers and setting up all of our processes and protocol, to serving in an advisory role, where I've basically set up the strategy for our pillars and our communications campaign and our metrics dashboard. So I've gone across the board, and it's been a really amazing experience, just because I've gotten so much exposure, not only to people at so many different walks of life and different experiences, but it's really pushed me to kind of assert myself outside of my comfort zone. I'm a very introverted person, as I'm sure some of us on here are. And so once you kind of find yourself in these situations, you begin to realize that there are similarities amongst all of us. And that's kind of how you can come together and launch things that, you never thought were possible.
That's great. Yeah, it seemed like you've had some definitely unique experiences. 4 years out of school. It's great. Well, so my last question is just, what would you have done differently while at Georgetown, knowing what you now know?
So this is a hard question. I loved Georgetown, but I realized that's maybe not the case for some people. So I think one thing that at the time that I was at Georgetown, I was really focused on just getting my work done and trying to experience college, like all of the experiences that people tell you about college, like the parties and, like the social clubs and things like that. And I think something, being a DC native, something that I kind of took for granted was that everything had to be a certain way or follow a certain path. But I really wish I had taken more opportunities. Like, I remember there was Rangila when I was there. They were doing these like unique tours of the Capitol. And it's not because like I hadn't ever seen the Capitol or things like that, but it was more so because you meet people in those situations that you never would have crossed paths with before. And that has been something I've always kind of regretted, is not taking advantage of those opportunities more, especially because Georgetown does such a good job at kind of creating those opportunities. And then secondly, I think everybody while I was in undergrad told me I should go to office hours. And at the time I was like, that's really an uncomfortable experience. I don't want to do that. But then I took comparative political studies with Professor Carnes. And that was, I'm hesitant to say life-changing because I realize that's a lofty word, but Professor Carnes has been such a wonderful mentor and friend to me since I've left, while I was in school and now the 4 years that I've been gone. And that all started for me getting a C- on my first essay in that class. And I went into his office hours and I was like, why did I get this grade? What happened? I worked so hard on this. And he was so diligent about helping me to understand my mistakes and grow from them, that I connect with him nearly twice a month now. And he's served as such a good advisor to my work on the Partnership for Central America, that upon reflection, I realized like maybe I should have taken more chances with my professors while I was in undergrad. And then the third thing, I'm not sure what year all of you are, but I know we have a sophomore in here. I think one thing I came to really value at the end, and also now post-grad, were my friends from my freshman floor. And I realize it's a weird thing to say, but I think freshman year was such a formative time for all of us, and you're kind of going through it. You're not really sure what's going on, and it's very confusing. And I think my friends from my freshman floor, like we ended up doing different things throughout school, but it was a kind of unifying or uniting factor amongst us, was that we had all had this shared experience, and we kind of always could rely on each other. Like we knew we had gone through this really challenging and difficult experience, and like they've been my friends for life now. So I just really encourage you to take the time to reconnect with them, or, grab coffee once in a while, because you'll see there are some things that happen once you graduate, and you really want to have that kind of basis of people who will stick by you no matter what.
Yeah, the theme is forming, building, maintaining relationships, which takes time, but at all levels, peers, faculty, supervisors, it's a really important thing to do. So Rana has a question, Reina. How did you find or seek the positions you have worked in? I mean, you obviously have been connected. This philanthropist, sounds pretty wonderful. So how are you connected to him or her? And but just in general, like, how did you find and seek these positions you worked on?
Yeah. So I should probably say it took a lot of resilience. I got rejected from so many jobs at the time. And ultimately, I was really resistant to use help, like family, friends, and to reach out. Like, my sister is 4 years older than me, to reach out to her friends, at companies that they were working at. And even just to use like the Georgetown alumni website. I actually, to find the philanthropist, I had messaged somebody who worked at the Clinton Health Access Initiative. I think they were an 2008 grad. And I was like, I'm really interested in global health and issues of inequity. Like, I'd love to talk to you. And coming out of that conversation, she was like, look, I'm going to connect you with some people in my network. I'll help you with your application and kind of work, together. And so then I was talking with a family friend, and I was like, yeah, I'm going through the application process for the Clinton Health Access Initiative. And, it's something I'm really interested in. And it looks kind of, promising. And they were like, oh, you have to meet who happened to be the philanthropist senior advisor. They were like, he serves on the board of CHI, and, he could really help you. And so had I not just, kind of pursued different outlets, I wouldn't have gotten that. And that's why I really want to emphasize, like, there is no formula to this. I really just used the resources I had and sought out new ones when nothing was working out. So I guess the 3 takeaways are: don't be afraid to use the alumni network. That's what we're here for. 2 would be even things where you're like, I don't know why I'm doing this or what's going on. Explore it. Like, we're all young. We have a lot of time on our hands. It might not seem like that, but the 10-minute conversations you have with people you never thought you'd engage with can get you a dream job in the long run. So I guess, and then 3 would be, and I really want to reiterate this because it's something I struggled with for a long time, but don't be afraid to assert yourself. Like, we're all going to be you all are going to be Georgetown grads, and you're all very smart and very well educated. And use that to your advantage. A lot of people don't have that opportunity. And so if you can use it to make a difference in this world, then there's nothing you can regret in the long term.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm going to see if there's any other questions, but I'm going to ask one last question. So for students who are interested in your work and some of the things that you're doing, what would be some titles, like job titles, and where for them to look for some of these opportunities? I know, often they haven't heard of the words, program manager or program officer, for example. Any other tips that you can get in terms of finding positions that have like a similar role as yours?
Yeah. So I found that the LinkedIn job search filter is really helpful. And basically what it allows you to do is filter like your experiences, your internships, and your interests. And so like for me, I knew I would be entering at like an analyst, or sometimes they call them program assistant level. And that's in that role, you'll get very random things. So like, for example, I got a lot of things that had to do with like climate justice, which I had put health on mine. I wasn't interested in that at all. but you find that you like with an analyst role, you kind of find things that you never thought of. And then the second thing that I did that I found to be really helpful was on the Georgetown alumni web page. I forget what the platform is called now, but there's an option where you can click your year and like what type of experience you're looking for. At least there was when I was using it, so it might have changed. And sometimes like people will look at your resume or look at your experiences and be like, wow, you had this really incredible internship, like entering as a program assistant, you know, for now we'll do like a 3-month internship or something, or like 3-month trial period. And then, you know, then you can move up to analyst or associate. And I think one thing that my friends at least have always struggled with is out of school, you want to tell everybody that you have this wonderful job and, you know, you've been so successful. And so a lot of them were afraid to do these like trial period internships. But my friends who did them actually found them to be way more valuable than just starting off right away. For example, like at Edelman, on their policy team, everybody has to do a 6-month, or I guess when I was a graduate, everybody had to do a 6-month internship, and it deterred a lot of my friends from doing that. And the 4 friends that did it were like, we built our network within the company and we built our skill set so that once we did get to the analyst or policy, like policy associate level, I don't know what the title is, but we already had like a basis, and it made them way more comfortable and way more empowered to use their skills. The other thing that I did, which I'm not sure if this is helpful, but I would do like online coding classes and online like Excel training classes, because if you can put on your resume these like that you're proficient in Microsoft Suite, or if I'm sure like some of you at least, if you can put like you're proficient in Python or things like that, it makes your resume a lot more attractive. And in our industry, not a lot of people have those skills because we've never really been forced to. But now that I'm in a position to manage people, I'm like, wow, I really wish I had built a better basis from the beginning.
It's a great point. I listened to a webinar a while back on how data and data skills are so important in global health, and it's what everybody's looking for. So it's a great point. We do have another question, and I was wondering this too. You know, often we hear IOs, you know, such as WHO, don't really have a lot of entry level positions, and so curious if you could share the specific question: does the WHO and other orgs offer many entry level positions for recent grads with little work experience?
No, unfortunately, no. But that's also, I should have mentioned this. That's one of the reasons why I did my master's straight out of school. And I did it in London, actually, because it's they're in Europe, they're 1-year programs. They're actually 11-month programs. So, and 3 of those months, you're writing your dissertation. And so while I was in grad school, while I was writing my dissertation, I worked at a pharmaceutical company. And it was one way. So I used my work at the pharmaceutical company to as the research for my dissertation. And so that was a really good way to kind of combine, or like, I think, what's the expression, like hit 2 birds with 1 stone. I was finishing my grad degree, but also at the same time getting practical work experience. And so a lot of the programs in Europe, especially in London and in Germany, I don't know if it's an option, but they really focus on helping you to build those skills. What the WHO looks for, though, and again, I was always kind of in this weird arm's length distance from ops, but one thing they always look for is prior experience at a nonprofit. Not because like necessarily your skills or like you build an intense skill set or anything, but more so because you get a better understanding of how the system works and how how to understand and attack, or I don't know if that's the right word, but how to understand issues, especially when you have limited funding and you have to deal with a lot of different political actors, a massive bureaucracy. And so it kind of teaches you those like interpersonal skills that are beneficial no matter where you go. The other thing is they do look for people who worked in consulting. But that's because you can build those practical management and presentation skills. So for me, I was technically a pharmaceutical consultant, and that really helped to distinguish my resume from really anything else on my resume.